Your first conclusion. It's the first thing you think of, okay, I know the secret. I guarantee you what you found in this book, that there was a shining knight. Somewhere, some charismatic, brilliant, determined savior arrived at the doorstep of Walgreens and said, I'm here, we're off to greatness.
Yeah. Well, a few things from the data. Number one, over 90% of the CEOs that made this happen were insiders. 3 of them were family members. They came from deep inside the company. 2/3 of the comparison companies, the companies were same industry, tried to do it but failed, tried outsiders. So first, the whole idea that we need to look out there for the great heroic savior to come riding in and make our companies great is simply not supported by the evidence. If you're an outsider, you can still do it, but it's statistically more difficult. Second, we found that the variable of things like charisma, charismatic presence, to be negatively correlated with the ability to make companies go from good to great. I've come to see charisma as like any other handicap. It's like a limp or a lisp. You can overcome it with conscious attention and still build a great company.
By what? By constantly saying, don't focus the attention on me, focus it on this company.
Yes, because think about it this way. Back in Built to Last, we wrote about the difference between people who build clocks and people who tell time. A lot of entrepreneurs are time tellers. They are the single great person who can tell the time, and as so long as they are there to tell the time, everything is fine. But when they go away, there's no clock that can tell the time without them. And in Good to Great, we found a similar analogy to that. We found in the Good to Great companies these, what we call level 5 leaders, but they built this great executive team. And over in the comparison companies, we found something called a genius with 1,000 helpers. And this genius with 1,000 helpers basically really didn't have a company. They were a genius. They had all this help to implement, allow them to paint on the great canvas of corporate life. And the problem with the genius with 1,000 helper model is that it also goes hand in hand often with charisma, because you have the genius with 1,000 helpers who charismatically motivates all the helpers to do what needs to be done. That is not building a great company. That is simply being a charismatic leader with a lot of help.
Because when the charismatic leader dies, goes away, leaves...
Or ceases to be a genius.
Or ceases to be a genius. The gene just goes away.
Right, exactly.
Hello, my gene, where is it? I had it yesterday.
Exactly. Well, I mean, it's interesting. You take the case of Lee Iacocca. I mean, here is our consummate example of the great sort of towering, charismatic, genius leader. But if you look closely, Chrysler was a comparison company in our study. It went from good to great for about 6 years. But at the end of Iacocca's tenure, Chrysler was almost back to where it had started.
Before he left.
Before he left. And so what you have is this, he came in as the great leader, but then everything kind of depended on Lee, the man, the dictator himself, the great disciplinarian. About halfway through his tenure, he stopped making genius decisions. He went off in aircraft companies and did the Maserati cars and did all these things that were basically wrong decisions. But guess what? If you lead with charisma, you can convince everybody that you are right through the power of your personality. If you don't have charisma, you have to win the argument based on the facts and the merits of the argument.
And performance.
And performance.
Yeah. So in the end, it becomes the company.
It becomes the company. And therein is the kind of critical thing that we saw. It's really not sort of charisma versus not. I mean, I think Sam Walton was a charismatic who transcended that variable to become a great company.
He overcame his charisma.
He overcame his charisma and built a great company. He was one of the classic level 5s. Here's the essential variable.
Before we go, what's a level 5?
Okay. How do I want to put that in shorthand? We had a great debate on the team. Can I just tell a quick story about on the team? Our whole team process was one of search for answers, infused with data, and then great debate about what that data means. And I had this wonderful group of people who worked with me. We came to call ourselves the Chimps. And we'd have these raucous meetings, and ultimately, they were people who were not loyal to me, they were loyal to the data. That was the kind of person I wanted. And one day I walked into the research team meeting, and they'd all joined hands. And I looked at them, and I thought, well, that's sort of different. And they said, today is the day, Jim, we've decided to tell you that you are wrong. Okay.
And we've locked hands.
We've locked hands, and we're not leaving here until you accept the data. And they said, our read of the data is that leadership really matters in these transformations. And I pushed back and I said, look at the comparisons. You can't tell me that Lee Iacocca and Stanley Galt and Jack Eckerd and the people in the comparison companies weren't also leaders. Leadership is a non-variable. It's our great plug figure for everything we don't understand. Leadership is not the answer. They pushed back and they said, we found, as we look at the data, that the leaders in the good to great companies were all cut from the same cloth. and it was cloth that was different than the comparisons. So what we found is we saw leadership as a level of sort of hierarchy, if you will, kind of individual capabilities, team capabilities, management capabilities, leadership capabilities at level 4, but there was this extra dimension that these people had, and that's, we didn't know what else to call them, so we just called them level 5s. Yeah. And it sort of, Iacocas and all those stop at 4, and here's the essence of the 5. The 5 is ambitious, first and foremost, for the cause, for the company, for the work, not him or herself. And they have the will to do whatever is necessary to make good on the ambition for that cause. That is the essence of a level 5.
Does this translate to other areas of endeavor? Mm-hmm. Writers, painters, athletes, generals?
Yeah. Well, first of all, what's interesting is the level 5s are often the ones who they sit in the background and don't often get a lot of the credit, but without them, the great things wouldn't have happened. Take, for example, the world of generals. One of the most understudied great generals is George Marshall, who was the classic level 5 in World War II, behind the scenes, and didn't take the European command because what was needed was for him, for the ambition, for the cause, was to be back home.